Welcome to Agency Bytes, a podcast for agency owners, hosted by agency veteran and coach Steve Guberman. Agency Bytes is a podcast focused on delivering actionable agency information from agency experts in about 25 minutes. Why 25 minutes? Because who has the attention span for much more these days? And you can squeeze in a listen between meetings with time for a bathroom break or coffee refill before your next meeting.
Welcome to Agency Bytes, a podcast dedicated to helping creative entrepreneurs thrive. I'm Steve Guberman from Agency Outsight, where I coach agency owners to build the agency of their dreams. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Jonathan Stark to the show. Jonathan is a former software developer who's on a mission to rid the world of hourly billing. He's the author of Hourly Billing is Nuts, the host of Ditching Hourly, and writes a daily newsletter on pricing for independent professionals. Jonathan, welcome to Agency Bytes.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm pumped to dig into it. The transition from software dev to ditching hourly. Talk about that. What was that jarring experience all about for you?
Yeah, so I was back in 2004-ish. I was managing a dev shop in Atlanta. We had about 10, 15 developers. We billed everybody out hourly. And it was a very well-known firm, and we had a lot of business. At one point, I realized that if we were going to hire more people, I would want to hire someone that looked like our most junior developer, who was almost basically an intern, and not hire our best developer, which seemed very strange to me. It was counterintuitive. But the best developer was really fast, and his salary was really high, and the junior developer was really slow, and their salary was really slow. But they kept their customers happy, both. So it was like, well, wait a second, the junior developer is way more profitable and is not really causing any real customer satisfaction problems. Mm-hmm. So, and I thought about this for a while, like weeks, before I discovered that, the reason is because we're selling hours instead of customer satisfaction or other kinds of outputs. So I explained that to my boss, and he said, I see what you're saying intellectually, but how would we transition to that? What would we transition to? And I had no idea. Mm-hmm. So I went solo, started my own independent, just solo consultancy, doing the same thing, but independently, and tried other pricing approaches. And over time, I started to figure the first year I did way better with using fixed prices. I tried value-based pricing. I read a book called Value-Based Fees by Alan Weiss. And I thought I was doing that. I wasn't really doing that. I was really doing more like fixed price, based on costs, really, but just setting my price really high. And it worked out great. And I was well known in the community at the time with the other software developers. And so it was pretty surprising that I left this firm, because I was the vice president and it was a big firm. And they were sort of following my story, I imagine, thinking I would probably fail and at leaving exiting the hourly trap, but it didn't fail. It was great. And I ended up speaking to that group of people about how I did it, because they would ask, like, well, what are you doing instead? And I'd be like, oh, I'm doing this. And like, well, how do you write that kind of a proposal? And I'd be like, do it like this. So just casually, people were asking me how I did it. So I started teaching them, I'd speak at the conferences and I'd speak at user groups and stuff. And that sort of snowballed over time, where more and more people were asking me for that. And I ended up in 2016, so many years later, I collected all of the writing I had done about how I ran my business into a book called Hourly Billing is Nuts. And in 2016, I self-published that. And that was when, in my mind, I was pivoting into a new kind of business where I helped people that were in the kind of business I was in at the time escape the hourly billing.
Yeah. And you call it Ditcherville as the community, and you talk about ditching hourly. And so delivering emails, the book, community, some workshops, some training, freeing agencies and freelancers of being strapped to just an hourly number, throwing that out. Is in any of the math that like you're teaching or, proposal development, is there an hourly component to it?
No. So
can you talk through what the secret there is?
Yeah. So like when you're pricing, there's a million things wrong with hourly billing. Like the obvious one being like, there's only so many hours in the year. And if you wanted to, like, especially as a soloist, But even with an agency, if you wanted to double your income next year, you couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way. Like if you double your hourly rate, you're going to lose a bunch of clients. If you work twice as much, you're going to go insane. And if you decide to scale up your inventory of hours by hiring a bunch of employees, you're going to have a new job. Like all of a sudden, you're going to be a boss and a manager. You're going to be doing one-on-ones. You're going to be writing job postings. You're going to be hiring, firing, all of that. So you can scale up an hourly model by hiring, but I didn't want to hire. And it's actually a very expensive way to scale up because the profit is not that, it's usually not that great because you've got, you're essentially marking up your employees' hours. And if your employees are good, like in my example at the beginning, if they're good, they're going to be expensive. So you're not making that much of a profit off of them.
Right.
Maybe you are. Maybe they're cheap for whatever reason. But I didn't want to be a boss. I didn't want to be a manager. I still don't have any employees. I don't even have a VA. So what do you do instead? Well, instead of thinking about how much time it's going to take you to execute some project for a client, which is you thinking about your costs, because that's your main cost, is your time. It's not your laptop or your internet connection. That's trivial. It's really your time. If you are going to insist on selling that and basing your costs, basing your price on your costs, you're going to end up pricing yourself too low if you do fixed prices, because any kind of non-trivial project, custom project for a client, you're not, I'm from the software background. You're not going to uncover all the scope you need to uncover in an hour-long sales meeting.
Right.
It's not going to happen. So like if you base your price on how many hours you think it's going to be to do the scope they asked for, it's almost always going to be too low, which is why people end up getting burned the first time they try fixed pricing, because probably if you were going to base it on your time, you should probably double it. So I think it's going to take 100 hours. It's actually going to take 200.
Sure. Surprise.
And then, right. And then they give that fixed price and they have no justification. The client's going to be like, well, this seems like really high. This is more than double the next quote that we got. Mm-hmm. So like, what is this based on? And you're like, well, I think it's going to take forever. And they're like, well, these other people don't think it's going to take forever, so we're going to go with them. So you're not having a conversation around the thing that's important to the client, which is what they want to get out of it. Like they don't want your marketing material, whatever you produce, whether it's lines of code or interfaces or Figma, whatever. They don't want that. They want something that they believe that's going to lead to. And when you're thinking this cost first way of like how much scope is there going to be so I can create an estimate or a fixed price, you haven't uncovered the thing that they want, and there's no connection to the things that you're going to do in your proposal to what the outcome that the client wants. So if you flip the whole thing around and you scope last instead of first, in the sales meeting, you spend the whole time saying to the client, well, why do you even want to do this? Like, okay, you told me about the project, I can do it. I can do all of these activities. I can do all these things, but why not do it? What's the difference? Why is this urgent now? Did something happen recently that, maybe Amazon is coming into their space, or there's a big regulatory change? There's some opportunity that you need to grab that's happening right now and has a shelf life. Why would you hire someone expensive like me? Why not do it in-house? Why not go to a low cost of living country and get a team from there? Like, why would you hire a US-based expensive, well-known consultant to help you with this? And if they answer all those things, you will understand the underlying motivation. You will have helped uncover the underlying motivation for them doing this thing at all, why they need to do it right now, and why they can't do anything cheap. They have to do something expensive, like hire you. Mm-hmm. And you can say like, okay, so let's say this goes perfectly well. It's like a huge home run. What would that look like for the business? Like, what are you going to do next? What is the needle you're trying to move? And they might say it might be something like market share. It might be something like brand reputation. It might be something like the approval of venture capitalists or their board of directors, or it's going to be something like, how are you going to know if I did a good job or not? You don't know code.
Look like?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What's the success metric? And they'll tell you, and based on that and the kind of company they are and how big they are, like headcount wise, and how important the project seems, like a lot of times I'll have heard the words mission critical. Like, this is mission critical. We have to get this right. We can't do it. We got to get this right the first time. We're not going to get a second chance. Those are always high value engagements. So then I would say, all right, in my head, be like, for a company like this outcome is easily $100,000 a year. It's worth easily $100,000 in the first year to a company like this, even if it's something like employee productivity, because I used to build internal systems. So it's like internal productivity, for sure, this is worth $100,000. And I can make the case for it. Like, if you want to grow past the point you're at, you're going to have to hire 10 more people in accounts payable if you don't spend a ton of money on a software solution. Okay. So now you've got some sort of success metric that you can contribute to. They believe you can contribute to it, or someone like you. That's why they talked to you in the first place. And you've uncovered the connection in their mind between the thing that you do and the outcome that they're hoping for downstream. And so at that point, you can say, well, I'm going to come up with 3 prices that are a fraction of that $100,000. And what is that? This is like 10,000, a tenth, 22,000, 2.2x, and then 5x, so 50,000. So if I have these 5 prices, so this client stands to save or make an extra $100,000 this year by the time once this thing launches, whatever it is. So it would be insane for them to not pay me at least 10% of a contribution to that, because otherwise, like, why are they even talking to me? They must believe I can contribute at least 1/10 toward their desired outcome. Sure. Now I look at those prices and I say, okay, $10,000. What could I do for this company that would contribute to that outcome? Like, what would help them move the ball downfield, to use a sports metaphor? And I'd come up with a scope after the price last. And that's going to mean me being clever about, I don't know, maybe putting together some video training. Maybe it's a DIY kind of thing where, yeah, it's only $10,000. It's less than you were expecting to spend, but my involvement's not going to be very deep. It's going to be a lot of best practices, maybe not so customized to your situation. Maybe it's a 4-hour workshop with the senior leadership on one day where I explain the principles that are going to go into a recommendation letter or a roadmap. And that's not what they called me for initially, but it would contribute to the outcome. Like, they probably called me for something very specific. Right. Then at the second level, I'll just keep doing the same thing. Like, okay, 22,000, if they give me that, what could I do? What could I add on top of that first option where I'm giving them some more assistance? Maybe I do build some of the really tricky pieces, or maybe I set up the code repo, or maybe I set up the brand template or the style guide, but I don't do all of the execution of the subsequent marketing materials or the subsequent screens or the subsequent lines of code. But I set them up for success, and then they have some more junior people kind of do it, and maybe I check their work as they go along. And then at the top level, well, for 50,000, maybe there's, I do more of the implementation, or maybe I do more training with whoever's going to do the actual execution. And it's fun, actually. You can get really creative when you give yourself a budget based on the value of the outcome to the client. It can be really kind of fun to think, like, creatively, how could I take my expertise and package it up in a way where it was profitable for me, very profitable for me at any one of these tiers. I don't care which one they pick, and gives them a range of options that allows them to pick something that's going to make sense and is attractive for their timeline, their budget, the level of expertise they think they need. And they can kind of sell themselves. It's like, well, what's the difference between this one and that one? And they're talking about which way to hire you, instead of giving them a single price based on how long I think it's going to take me, and then them to get into it's kind of an ultimatum, like, well, we don't know if this is a lot or not a lot, so we're going to have to shop it around, and then they compare you to like lower cost providers.
Right.
So it's kind long of answer to a short question.
Well, no, it's good to frame it, but it's kind of a small, medium, large model. And here I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. So let's go with the $10,000 model, where you're delivering, I think for an example, you use like an LMS or something like that. And so you would need to know, how many hours is this going to take me, so I know if it's profitable.
Well, but you don't think of it like that. I mean, yes, you have to, like, every business needs to have a sense of their costs in order to, like, not go out of business. Right. You don't base your prices on your costs. So you think, okay, if I had $10,000, what would I be fist pumpingly happy to do to deliver that. So it's probably something that you would take $5,000 for. It might be something you already have that you did for a previous client and you just repurpose it. It could be a binder. It could be like, it's probably something you already have or something that you can very easily do, or the scope is very limited. Like it's a 4-hour workshop with senior leadership and you do some preparation for that. But we're talking about people who are experts at what they do.
Sure.
They're not going to be off by an order of magnitude on how long it takes them to execute a scope that they made up for themselves.
Right. Are you a proponent of time tracking?
No.
No point to it in this model.
When I was billing hourly, I liked tracking my time. I had a system down. I was really good at it. It wasn't intrusive. It was very frictionless. And if someone listening, and I continued to do it in my first year, where I was like, well, I'm just curious. I want to see what my effective hourly rate is. But it got so ridiculous so quickly that I was like, I just sort of stopped doing it. It just became irrelevant. Well, I'm not going to guess your next question, but yeah, I'm not a fan. I think it's when I see people who are still tracking their time, I see it as a transitional phase. If they continue to track their time after the transitional phase, it makes me think that they're not actually doing value pricing. They're probably still thinking about scope first instead of scope last. So it's a little bit of not a red flag, maybe a yellow flag if people are tracking their time.
Yeah. Interesting. I've definitely heard and learned and helped implement value-based pricing, but I've not necessarily heard it framed as like scope first or scope last as what would help get you to that end goal of value-based pricing. So
you can't be thinking about scope. Do not think about, if you're thinking about scope in the sales meeting, if you're solving the problem in the sales meeting, you're doing it wrong. And it took me about a year or 2 years to unlearn that habit of scoping in the sales meeting. Like, how many screens is it going to be, and how many portals on each screen, and how many objects in the database, and how many fields, and how much business logic. Doesn't matter, because ultimately you're going to flip it around and say, well, because like it could be when you go cost plus, you can take the solution that they have suggested to you and just be like, okay, I don't know or care if this is what they should be doing. Here's how long it would take me. I don't know if it's worth it, what value they're going to get out of it. I just know that it's going to take me about 100 hours.
Right.
And times my hourly rate, to make it simple, let's say $100 an hour is $10,000, if I'm doing the math right. And it's like, it's $10,000. Well, what's that based on? Well, I think it's going to take me $100 an hour, 100 hours. Well, what's that based on? It's like, well, gut, past experience. Well, and then times what? Times $100 an hour. Where'd that come from? I just made it up.
Yeah.
So it's all picked out of thin air. But if you focus on the value first, because if there's no value there, if it's worth $1,000 to them for something that's going to take you 100 hours, there's no way that you can deliver the thing that they asked for. But there might be a way for you to deliver something they didn't ask for, because they're not the experts anyway. So how would they know to ask for the right thing? They're calling in an expert. It's like going to your doctor and saying, give me a triple bypass, and them saying, okay.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, but I've only got $100. That should be enough, right? So yeah, it's a complete mind shift. You have to flip 180 degrees, train yourself to not think about scope in the sales meeting, and instead reverse engineer an offer based on what it's probably worth to a company like this in this situation.
Yeah, I like the idea. Fun. It's fun, yeah. I like the idea of putting the perceived value on the client to communicate that back or somehow dig into that. And the challenge there is, and you can probably speak better to this because I've not done this model. Most clients are quick to say, I don't know what my budget is, or I don't have a budget. Tell me what this would cost. Now you're flipping it back to them and you're saying, well, what's it worth to you to achieve that level of success, whatever that level is for them.
Yeah.
And then you're assigning the value to it based on.
Yeah. I can't think of a time. If it's ever happened, I don't remember it, where a client came to me with like, okay, well, there's sort of one time it happened. But normally they just have it's almost a subconscious knowledge that they need whatever it is that you do.
Sure.
Because because they're spending time to talk to you. They wouldn't do that if they thought you couldn't help them with some business outcome.
Mhm.
That's not the way people work. So there's definitely something in there, but they almost always skip way past that and give you some self-prescribed solution without ever telling you what the malady is. It's like, give me a triple bypass. It's like, well, what's wrong?
What's wrong? Yeah.
It's like, oh, I feel like I have, I feel like there's burning in my chest and I can't breathe. It's like, well, maybe you just had Taco Bell last night and you need an antacid. It doesn't have to be. Almost always they're bringing you in as an expert at something. And in their mind, there must be some connection between what you do and what they think it will lead to for them. So for me, the process of the whole sales interview is to find out what that is.
Mhm.
And the approach I take is like this why conversation where like, why this, why now, why me? And that uncovers those answers. It's like magic. And
Mhm.
if it's like trying to talk them out of working with you or doing the project at all.
Right.
It's like, what's the business case here? Why are you going to give me $1 million? Like, what's in it for you? It's not like you're just not going to print out my code and hang it on the wall because it's so elegant. Like, what do you hope is going to happen next? Because if I don't know what the ultimate goal is, what direction we're driving, there's like 100 ways I could paint us into a corner. And we don't want to get to the end of this and the CEO says like one thing, like, well, how is this going to contribute to sales in China? You're like, I didn't know the interface had to be in Mandarin. Like, no, I would have done everything differently along the way if you know where you're going, if you know where they're they want you to help get them to. If you know what their desired future state is, it will actually make a big difference on how you do your work. It's much more efficient. You can deliver customer satisfaction much more reliably. And you could probably set the prices a little bit lower than you would have otherwise. And everybody ends up being more profitable. So it's great. I think it's great. And it leads to, not only can it lead to higher fees and more profit for you and the client, but it's a much more fun way to work. It's a much better client relationship because they're not micromanaging you and being like, how come it took so long to import the data yesterday when 2 weeks it only took half as long? And so now we got to pay $300 for every import. And it's like, they're just thinking about things at the wrong, clients in my experience calm way down about deadlines and micromanaging and all of that stuff when no matter how long it takes me, they don't pay another dime.
Right.
So the onus of estimating the cost that you brought up before, like you have some sense of how long it's going to take me to do this. The onus is on me, which is the person it should be on, because if I'm the expert, how can I have no idea how long it's going to take me to do something? Like maybe you're not an expert if you have no idea. So you should have at least a range.
Yeah. Is there a size team or a method of delivery or service, I'll say, that this might not work as well for versus other size teams or other services?
From the seller side or the client side?
From the agency side.
Yeah. So I think the home run, there's 3 different altitudes that I talk about in terms of the level of engagement you have with the client. So the floor level is kind of like support and maintenance, and to use a building metaphor, that's like the janitor, the people that are keeping the, whatever, power washing the outside of the building. They're maintaining the status quo. And that's the lowest profit because high labor, low value. Nobody wants to pay for that stuff, really. They just want everything to stay clean and stay working, but it doesn't. So they know they need to pay something, but they're not excited about it. And it's always going to be low profit because the labor is so high for it. And there's a middle level, which is like the execution level. It's kind of, you could call it implementation. And that's when you're coming in to implement a new status quo. So there's a new status quo has been decided on, like, here's how we want things to be in the future. And you're making that possible. So this would be this in the building model, this would be the builder who is given plans by an architect to build the new building or to build the new wing off the hospital or something. And then maintenance crews will come in after the fact. The highest altitude is, you could call it design, depends on what business you're in, but it could be a design phase. It could be a strategy phase. It's the highest level advisory phase where you work directly with the client to define their new status quo, to figure out where it is and create that roadmap or that blueprint or that high level architecture diagram. It's something very high level. It's something that happens before the other three steps. And if you're operating at that level, whether you have employees or not, that level is the most profitable.
Yep.
It is not necessarily the most revenue, but it's by far the most profitable. So at the bottom level, the maintenance level, it's a lot of revenue. The building level, actually the middle level, is probably the highest revenue because it's by far the most work. And it just can't, the costs are just so high for it. And the clients are usually excited about that piece because it's fun to see it come together.
Right.
And they expect to pay a lot of money for that piece. They don't expect to pay a lot for maintenance, and they don't expect to pay in absolute terms, they don't expect to pay more for the advice or the blueprint than for the building because they know it's a different call it, it's just a different level of importance. So you can get a lot of revenue in that middle level, but it's not that profitable. And anybody that is in execution work that is, especially building software, but I'm sure it's true in other, advertising, marketing, all this other like stuff where you have a lot of employees doing not busy work, but it's like busy work. It's not expertise work. It's just execution. It's like, here's the plan. Here's what I need you to do. Do it 40 hours a week and I'll be happy. It's not that high profit, but it is a lot of revenue. And if you've got a lot of payroll, then you need that kind of work to make sure you're making payroll. So I can see, and you can kind of operate in two of these altitudes at once, but not all three unless you have a ton of employees. So if you could operate in the strategy level, the top level, and the middle level, and you see architecture firms that are like design build firms, and that's kind of the physical world metaphor version for like consulting or an agency, where it's like, well, we only build software projects that we're a good fit for, and we only do it for people where we helped define the roadmap or the architecture or the strategy. We don't take other people's code. We don't work on other people's brand guidelines. We won't work with someone else's positioning statement. If you want to work with us, starts at the strategy level where the principal is probably involved. The principals of both companies are probably involved. It's, I've sat in workshops, 2-day workshops, is $65,000. And it's like, okay, great. Now we know what we need to do. How do we do it? And like, okay, and there might even be like a high level strategy for how to do it. But then it's like, okay, that is going to get either handed off to a completely different company who you partner with, or if you have a bunch of employees and you need to make payroll, maybe you take the implementation or the execution work that you want, that you feel like you're good at. So you could say, you could operate at those two levels, or you could operate at the bottom two levels where you get a blueprint, you build the thing, and then you maintain the thing.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So the value, your question was, value pricing is the biggest home run at the top level.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're seen as the expert there, and you're sought after far more than if you were on the execution level. And so, yeah, to your point, far more profitable. And you can, that's the level that most people want to get to. They want to pick and choose the engagements and be sought after. So interesting. Yeah. I'm gonna have to dig into it some more. I mean, I think you certainly stirred some traditional thinking in my brain up a lot. And like you said, you have to unlearn a lot of those learned behaviors of, this is how we formulate a scope, and this is how we formulate budgets, and it's based on past experiences and hourly buckets of time, and 3xing salaries and things like that. And so interesting, different way to look at it that you've been coaching agencies on for quite some time now, right?
Yeah, I informally I started doing it, I think in 2009 or 2010.
Okay.
So just sort of like friends of mine would be like, can you just like, can we jump on a call every week and figure, like, oh, I got a proposal to send out. Could you just take a look at it for me?
Yeah.
And it's radical when I had one guy recently who's just a friend of mine, and he had a proposal to write, and he was like, I had no idea where to price this. He's like, just none. He was like, I know it will take us. He had a sense of like how much work it was going to be for the thing that was requested. He's like, I could price it based on that, but it feels like I'm leaving way too much money on the table. And so I literally talked to him for like 45 minutes on the phone, and I asked about the client. What does the client want? What's the situation? And it was high value, high urgency, and they were the only game in town for what this they were the only people the client was going to trust to do this.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think the number needs to be like literally add a 0 to the number that you're talking about. And he was like, but how do I make that case? And I'm like, well, here's how you make the case. It's like, and it was like, that made sense. And they did it.
Yep.
So he was very, very happy. He definitely bought the next round of drinks after that one.
And I wonder if after they said yes, did he think, man, I should have charged more? Which is often that mindset of they closed so quickly. Did I leave more money on the table? And so a lot of mindset behind that pricing as well.
You can certainly price too low. So if you are giving these 3 option proposals and clients are regularly picking the third one, then you're miscalibrating. Like,
absolutely,
you're miscalibrated, because they should be picking option 2 if you use the Goldilocks curve that I described.
Yeah. So
when they come along, you're attracting some kind of client or getting referrals for a particular kind of client, and they're always picking option 3. Like, you're completely undervaluing your contribution to their business outcomes. So, that doesn't happen super often. Usually it's the other way around, where people are just thinking about their costs. They haven't uncovered the value to the client or the desired business outcome, and they do not connect the dots. And then the only thing the client has to compare you to is proposals from other people who are probably all underballing hourly rates to get the work. And then once they're halfway through the project and 100% through the budget, they're stuck. Yep. So now everybody starts fighting, but they still keep paying you.
Yeah. And this model also avoids that part you just kind of mentioned, where we don't want to be in a race to the bottom price. Right. So the value there is going to say, all right, we'll take that middle one, not the top one, not the low one, and we're not going to just throw yours away and go for the cheap guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, dig it. Real quick, I'm going to throw a couple of non-pricing modeled questions at you just because they're fun. What's and blanket rule? It can be a physical, digital, personal, or professional answer.
Okay.
But AI can't be the answer.
Okay.
What's something that you recently integrated into your life that you look back and you think, how did I live without this tool or solution or thing?
First one that came to mind was Grammarly, which is AI, but Grammarly, as a soloist and someone who publishes a newsletter every single day, that has been a game changer. That was the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah, Grammarly. I think before AI became so mainstream, Grammarly was still a pretty clutch tool for a lot of people, that we type so quick and it'll tell us that's not the right word, or you spelled everything wrong. And yeah, that's me too.
Yeah.
What's a hobby or a show or a book or something that you are binging these days that you can't get enough of?
Well, I'm really into martial arts, and so lately all of that has been getting ready for my Hapkido black belt test. So,
wow,
good
for you. Good luck with that.
Thanks.
And then what's just an invaluable piece of business advice that you can share with agency owners?
Oh man. Scope last. Other than something that we didn't already talk about, figure out how to be the one and only for someone and not just one of many. If you can't do that, you're never going to get out of the race to zero. You need to be the one and only, not to the whole world, but to an attractive group of customers who you'd really want to who you really like and you want to work with. Be the one and only for something for that group.
Yeah, I love that. That's important, especially in a world where we're trying to convince people to not be all things to all people. Yeah. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you?
You can Google for the Ditching Hourly Guy, or if you can spell my name, you can go to jonathanstruck.com.
Got it. Very cool. Jonathan, thank you again. Appreciate you and your experience for sharing with us today.
Thanks, Steve. It was fun.
Thanks again for tuning in to Agency Bytes. If you know someone with expert knowledge on a topic that agency owners would love to hear about, go to agencyoutsight.com/podcast-guest and nominate them.